Good Tuesday morning, my friends. What a day it has been already, and I'm excited for what God has in store for the rest of this day. I'm Pastor Ben Hayes from First Baptist Church, Dadeville, Alabama, bringing you our thought for the day, and I hope that you are ready for this day to serve the Father and to experience His blessings in your life. If you have your Bibles, look with me at Galatians chapter 3, and we're picking up in verse 18, and I want you to listen as I read this verse. For if the inheritance is of the law, it is no longer of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. What inheritance? What inheritance? Well, think back to what God promised to Abraham. God promised that he would make of him a great nation. God promised that he would be in covenant with him in that special relationship where God is God and Abraham and his descendants are his people. Now that is a great promise. That is a great inheritance. And that was supposed to go down through the ages, through the seed of Abraham. And ultimately it has. I think about this so many times when we talk about the promised land, Canaan. And my wife and I are going through on our daily Bible readings where we finished Joshua and we're at the beginning of Judges. And that point where God says that he left some of the enemies in the promised land to test them. Now think about this. God always tests his people. That's the reason for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. It was a test of obedience. And throughout history, we see this. It isn't the fact that God doesn't know what people are going to choose. He does. God is omniscient. He has all foreknowledge. He knows. And understand that in the midst of all of this, God places things, people, objects, opportunities in our path so that we see how we're going to respond to that. And so he left enemies in the promised land because if all we ever had was good stuff, if all we ever had was blessing, if nothing in life was ever hard, we would never grow spiritually. Now, back to what he said, the inheritance, the promise of a great nation, the promise of a great land, but more importantly, the promise of this covenant relationship with God. Paul says, if the inheritance could be obtained through the law, then it's no longer about a promise, the promise that God made to Abraham. But God gave it to Abraham by promise. He didn't say to Abraham, okay, Abraham, big boy, you got to follow all of these steps of the law, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you do all of that successfully, then I'm going to be your God and you'll be in covenant with me. He didn't say to Abraham, okay, you got to do all these things, and then I'm going to give you a son of promise, and through him, all the nations are going to be blessed, and you're going to be blessed. And God didn't do that. He said, this is what I'm going to do, Abraham. I've called you out of Ur of the Chaldees, and I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people, and I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing to all the rest of the nations. Now, that's the promise. That's the inheritance. Now, where does the law come into play? Well, it comes into play much later when God calls Moses up to the top of Mount Sinai and gives him the Ten Commandments. And it continues as he gives him all of these other laws that the nation of Israel were supposed to follow. For their good, it was for their good so that they could understand what it means to be a part of this covenant community, but it was not what made them a part of the covenant community. Some would say, well, it was circumcision that did that. No, it wasn't. Circumcision was a sign of the fact that they were part of the covenant community. Well, it was their Sabbath worship. No, Sabbath was what they were called to do by God for their good, for their benefit. So where did the covenant come from? It came from the promise of God. Not from the promise of Abraham, not from the promise of Isaac or Jacob or any of his sons. The promise came from God. The inheritance of that blessing, being a part of the covenant family, the covenant community, all of that comes from the promise of God. Now, Paul doesn't do this, and I may be taking some liberty here, but let's change that word promise to grace. Let's think about that for just a minute, because it is by grace that we're saved through faith in Jesus Christ, not of ourselves, not of works, not of works of the flesh, not of works of the law, but by grace through faith, so that we could be part of this new covenant community. Think about that today. I hope you're part of the covenant community. If you're not, come see me. Let's talk. Be blessed. I'll see you back here tomorrow.